support, that's pride and dignity. Stop the New World Order. Welcome to Herpanmo TV and welcome to this. It's another reply video to Stefan Molyneux. That's right. Mr. Molyneux has once again inspired me to put photons onto celluloid because of something he himself has said. This guy always wants me to reply. He doesn't want me to reply to him. I think he watches my replies. Some of the things he said indicate that. But he always says things that I feel need some kind of response. So we're going to reply to Stefan Molyneux. Yes, Mr. Molyneux of the decks. That's right. Mixes so quick. 2 tracks melt into one. That's how we're having big fun. So kick back, relax while we do it to you and your eardrum. Let me hear say universally preferable behaviour. Let me hear say resources. Let me hear say sexual market value. Let me hear say non-aggression principle. Oh, blimey. I was channeling my inner rapper there. But yeah, we're going to discuss mysticism yet again. Stefan Molyneux has made another video called The Truth About Mysticism. It is, yes, that's right. It is, it was just a couple of weeks ago, actually. What was it? It was, yeah, I get the reference right. There's a link in the description box anyway, but it was FDR 5217, The Truth About Mysticism. So it's quite a recent one. He's now into the 5,000s in terms of his very, very prolific creativity. And so yeah, this is the second reply I've made to him about mysticism, and I will actually be referring you to the first one. There's a link in the description box to the first reply video I did about mysticism to Stefan Molyneux, which I think is very important actually, because this one is very different. It's a very different video, but it's certainly not kind of just a copy. It appears Stefan has changed his position slightly, and although I don't think he even realises himself quite as much yet, which is why I'm going to be doing this video. But reply to him. But anyway, as always, when I do these reply videos, I'm faced with kind of a choice, you know, because when I do like a dissection, a breakdown, a deep dive into whatever piece of material Molyneux has produced, or indeed any content creator that I analyse. You can play the whole thing and get accused of copyright infringement and breaching fair use, or you can like play selected clips and cut out highlights and then be accused of misrepresenting him and editing him in a misleading manner. So what do? Well, I'm not going to play this entire interview, but I'm going to play most of the first part of it, most of like over 3/4 of it, in its entirety. As you saw the clip, you saw the little slide at the beginning. I am claiming fair use on this, which I think is fair enough. I think it is for the, yeah, well, you know all the details. I should learn how to do what Terry Joyce does and have like a banner at the bottom with slightly with scrolling lettering on, say this is fair use, transformative work, etc. Now, whenever I do these deep dives, these dissection videos to whomever it is, usually Molyneux, sometimes other people, I select like a little bumper audio or video, a little bumper audio, which I insert into the playback at certain points to remind me that I need to stop and make commentary. And I've made a note of the commentary I need to make at the various points when I have to stop. And if you can remember the various videos, the various bumper audios that I've produced. This little short, a few seconds long. Do you remember it was Professor Brian Crock's billions and trillions of stars, and there was Terence McKenna. You know, I can't remember what he actually said, but I think it was my ayahuasca reply to Molyneux that I actually chose. I actually chose Terence McKenna. Now in this case, I've got a rather unusual bumper, unusual bumper. Now what it is. It's a tiny little clip from a TV show that came out in the early 2000s called The World's Greatest Conspiracy Theories. Now, it's very difficult to get hold of. I downloaded a copy years ago. It's now, I can't find it anywhere. So what I did was, whenever I'm in this situation, I actually posted it onto my Interesting Videos public Facebook group. So I'll just show you it if you want to see it. This is it anyway. It's on my, there's the, let me just share screens. Whoops, there we go. So this is the video. Alright, and there's the URL. This is my Interesting Videos public Facebook group. Put it up there like in May. And You can watch the whole thing. It's just over an hour and 10 minutes, hour 11 minutes long. I should point out before you watch it, do bear in mind it is kind of taking the mickey a bit. It's quite skeptical, but also it's kind of a joke. It makes a joke out of everything, and that includes the person we're going to talk about. Because now in one part of this particular video, they discuss crop circles, and they have like a segment on crop circles. And they have a very brief interview with her. Well, obviously they must have interviewed her for much longer. But they have an interview with a young hippie woman, and she says this. I'll just play you what she says. Let me just find it. Okay, this is what she says. This is my bumper video. By the way, this is a young woman who I really actually resent the way this particular TV show ridiculed her, took the mickey out of her, put her in there, and really as a figure of contempt. The woman herself, as you'll see if you watch the video on my Facebook group, I actually took a screenshot of that and I made it into the title picture for this particular video. It's that young woman there. She's a very classic hippie, and when you hear her speak, you'll know what I mean. And I think she's actually very sweet and likable. I don't find her attractive, but I think she is an amiable kind of person, I would say. So this is her talking this is her what she says. This is the only comment she makes in the entire program. Waiting for the player to open.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the earth.
She's referring to crop circles there, and of course I feel intuitively there's some sort of communication from the earth. And of course they put her into this program to take the mickey out of people who believe in things like this, as indeed Stefan, he's going to come on to the issue of straw manning and steel manning and things like that. But anyway, so let us begin. I'm now going to come. I'm just going to get my notes up, and I will come on to. Yep, this is the video of FDR 5217. There's a link in the description box to that. Anyway, but before I come on to that, I just want to maybe talk about what actually initiated this whole situation. Before I come on to FDR 5217. This was actually this particular show I'm going to talk about, this free domain radio show that I'm going to discuss and I'm going to analyse, is actually a reply Stefan did to some comments that were left under a video, a very short video he put up on his locals page. Now, when I say short, I'm not kidding. It's very, very short indeed. What I'll do is I'll just show it to you now. Hang on a sec. I'll just find it and I will show it to you. Here we go. Right. Hang on, right. All right. All right. Okay. Let's go back to that. This is it here. I'm sorry for the delay. I'm just preparing the display. Here we go. This is the video. This is a video that Stefan Molyneux put up on his locals page. Literally a few days before he posted this. Particular. This is what he put up on his locals page. Literally a few days before he did FDR 5217. So have a watch of this.
Mysticism is a gateway drug to mental illness.
No, I'm not kidding when I say short, am I? I'm not kidding at all. Do you want to watch that again?
Mysticism is a gateway drug to mental illness.
That's it. That's it. Mysticism is a gateway drug to mental illness. He switches the camera on. He says mysticism is a gateway drug to mental illness, and he switches the camera off. And of course, he got a large number of replies to that. And he seems to have objected quite a lot to the kind of replies he got. And now, is he justified in that or not? Let's have a watch. Let's go to FDR 5217 and let's play that particular. Let's play the particular video we're talking about here, and then I don't need to show you this. I'm just going to play the. All you need really is the audio. It's just basically Stefan talking at the camera anyway. So I just downloaded the audio. So that's all, because that's all you need really. Although he does put up videos on BitChute and I think a couple of other alt text sites now. He's been banned from YouTube. So here we go.
All right, so it's pro tip and also blowing your mind time. So I put out a statement the other day. It was a very short video, like 20 seconds or whatever.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the earth.
20 seconds? No, Stefan, try 5 seconds. It was 5 seconds long.
Saying that mysticism is a gateway to mental illness. And I was really struck by something that somebody said the other day about how one of the reasons that the church used to punish witches is witches and astrology and Ouija boards and so on tends to exploit a particular weakness in the female mindset that leads to mental illness. So I was talking about mysticism. Now, of course, everyone knows that I grew up with a very mystical mother, and she did go crazy.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the earth.
Yeah, Stefan, we know that Stefan has described many times about his relationship with his mother, and I sympathise enormously. My mother wasn't, I don't think my mother was as bad as his, but my mother was a very emotionally abusive person who developed a deep resentment and even a hatred of me as I grew. Stefan's mother, if you're a regular viewer of his, was a very violent and abusive person. Now, is her mysticism related to that? And of course, we're going to get onto the definition of mysticism, because it's not quite as simple. That the word mysticism is not as simple as many people think it is, and indeed how Stefan originally portrayed it in that little 5-second Locals video, as well as his previous statements on mysticism. But this is why this video is so interesting, is that he actually goes into a bit more detail about what mysticism is, and it appears he's changed his mind a bit. But just to stick with the notes I made here and about what it all means, is her mysticism, Stefan's mother's mysticism, related to her abusive personality? Is this a cause or a correlation or an effect? Because if it's a correlation, then it's just another. You can't say that it has anything to do with it, as skeptics always like to point out. So let us continue.
And so if I put out a very short video saying mysticism is a gateway to mental illness, if you disagree with me, perfectly fine, of course. This is a debate forum. This is, great. It helped me out as a brother. See, I look for love when it comes to debates. I look for love of truth.
Oh.
And if somebody is a listener to me and I've made an error, I would expect them to reach out in affection and positivity and love. They don't have to, but I'm just saying in terms of getting people to listen to you, I think it's kind of important to do that.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the earth.
Yeah, Stefan, it's my pleasure, because of course that is exactly what I'm doing, aren't I? I'm reaching out with love, Stefan, with lots and lots of love, and I actually don't. And I don't think I ever get angry with Stefan when he says things like this, because Stefan talks a lot of sense. I find him very, very inspiring and educational. Just sometimes he talks complete shit, and when he talks complete shit is when I tend to make these videos. But even then, if I agree with him on something, I'll say so.
And so if I've made a mistake, then you should try to reach out in some sort of positive way to, and that doesn't mean you can't be harsh. It doesn't mean you can't be aggressive or anything like that. But you can really sense when people are motivated by love, when they want to help you. So if I say mysticism is a gateway to mental illness and you think I'm completely and totally wrong, then to help me, and of course not just to help me, but to help all the people who've listened to that, I think you should reach out in curiosity and love of truth and all of that, and not in this sort of modern thing. It's like this modern thing where people are kind of just bitchy and manipulative and negative. And I know that doesn't sound like me reaching out with love, but I am actually reaching out with love in this instance, because I really want people to know how they come across so that debates can improve.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the earth.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. There is the bitchiness he talks about. Basically, is the sophistry and aggression, which is used now, which is used more and more and more as a substitute for real debate. And it's got to the point, I think, where real debate is becoming like a diamond in a dunghill. It's incredibly rare, to be honest. It really is. Which is why I try to do as much of it as I can. Which is why I challenged Steve Mumbling to a debate, which he hasn't replied to me yet. But I'm up for that, Steve. If you're watching, I'm up for that anytime, buddy, anytime.
So if I say mysticism is a gateway to mental illness, then this upsets you, and being upset is totally legit and valid. You've got to trust your gut and your disgust impulse, and maybe I'm totally wrong. Well, the first thing, of course, that people should do, since it's a very brief statement, if it upsets you, first you should know why it upsets you.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the earth.
Now, it doesn't upset me. It doesn't. It doesn't. This does what this all. This none of this upsets me. It just this little 5-second, like very very brief. I don't know if you can call it a video. It's not even a short. It's not even a Reader's Digest TikTok. It's a 5-second clip of you saying to the camera, "Mysticism is a gateway drug to mental illness." Now, that to me is just a verbal island. I mean, to quote you, Stefan, no argument. It's not an argument. It's not. I'm not upset, but I just I think you could have done better.
Your upset may be perfectly valid. I mean, if somebody said, theft is great, that would be upsetting to me, right? That would be a negative. So being upset is totally fine. You've got to figure out why you're upset. Now, the first thing when you're responding to someone who's made a very short and pithy statement is to ask for definitions. Because how do you even know you disagree?
You're now accusing someone else of making a short and pithy statement after your little 5-second mini epic. Anyway, you may wonder what he's going to talk about. He's actually referring to someone who left a comment under that video, and he'll come on to it in a minute.
How do you even know that you're disagreeing with someone unless they define their terms? I mean, to take a silly example, somebody might define communism as free trade. I mean, you know what they mean. And since it's a very short statement, and mysticism is a very complex word, the first thing is say, oh, that's interesting. Can you tell me what your definition of mysticism is? Now, if my definition of mysticism is anything that is not rigidly empirical and logical, that's my definition of empiricism. So if I were to say, which I'm not, and that's not my definition of...
It's interesting you said that, and he's going to expand in more detail later, because I find myself disagreeing with him less and less over the course of this video.
Mysticism. If I were to say everything that is not rigidly logical or perfectly logical and empirical is mysticism, and therefore everything which is not perfectly logical and empirical is a gateway to mental illness, well, again, it just takes a moment's thought, and this is what happens so often in the world when you're a thinker, is that other people react and don't put a moment's thought into it. So, for instance, if you thought that was my opinion, then you have to be critical of yourself before you dump on others. If you want to be taken seriously, like if you want people to engage with you as a serious thinker, then you have to be critical of your own ideas. So
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the earth.
And that, Stefan, is why I am so interested to hear what the skeptics have to say. As you know, I interact with and take a lot of interest in the skeptic movement, and I analyse. Excuse me. Pardon me. I analyse the kind of things that debunkers say for that very reason.
Let's say you thought, or somebody thought. Let's make it personal. Let's say that you thought, well, Steph means that everything that isn't logical and empirical is a gateway to mental illness. Okay. Well, Steph does dream analyses. I wonder how that fits into, what does that mean about being relentlessly logical and empirical? Are dreams logical? They are not. Are dreams empirical? Well, by definition, they're not, because they're occurring in your mind, and laws of identity and physics and all of that are broken on a regular basis.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the earth.
Well, I know Stefan probably won't be very, very keen on this, but I'm interested in the idea of precognitive dreaming. There are certain people who have had numerous dreams which appear to predict real events, and some of them make attempts to collect empirical data on that. There's the man who dreamed the future, and I can't find this documentary anywhere for love nor money. There's just a couple of little clips of it, which is quite frustrating. If you know the whole thing, the man who dreamed the future talks about Edward Mandel, a man who not only had dreams which he considered precognitive, he actually went and took photographs of him holding up the paintings he made of them in front of a calendar. So, in order to provide some evidence of when he had the dreams. He used to go into the bank and they used to take a photo of him holding up the painting by the calendar. So I had this dream on this particular date. Yeah, if you find that, please, if you find that documentary anywhere, please let me know. There's a couple of clips on YouTube. That's all. There's also the parallel universe theory that some people who dream experience parallel universes of some kind. There's some similarities in terms of the surreal nature of dreams. Although not all dreams are surreal, some are very, very naturalistic, but most of my dreams have this kind of surreal element. To Robert Monroe and what he said about Locale 3. If you ever read Robert Monroe's Journeys Out of the Body, very, very interesting indeed. So, but that's kind of an aside. I don't think Stefan would go for that much, and it's just a tangent, really. It's not really related to the theme of this video.
So the fact that I do dream analysis means that I take the subjective, the personal, the irrational, and the anti-empirical with great seriousness. So it can't mean that, right? What about the fact that I write poetry and plays and novels? What about that? Are they relentlessly logical and empirical? Well, no, a novel is a work of fiction. It's not the whole point. If it was fiction, if it was non-fiction, it would be a documentary.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the earth.
Right, there's actually a skeptic video maybe worth looking at, actually. It's this one here. I'll just show it to you. Okay, it's this one here. It's called Skepticism and the Humanities, TAM 2012, put up 10 years ago by the James Randi Foundation. James Randi Educational Foundation. Of course, the late James Randi ran this big skeptic organisation, which I've talked about many times before. And this is just an interesting video called Skepticism and the Humanities, which is...
Hello, everybody.
There we are. I won't show it you, obviously, but you can see little bits of it here and there. There you go. So that's worth watching, but it relates a little bit to what Stefan was talking about there. Okay, so continuing.
It would not be a novel. What about a poem? Is a poem relentlessly empirical? It is not. It is a compressed dream state designed to communicate an emotional truth that stimulates thought.
Well, poetry is actually a very, very hard word to define. If you try doing it, and you'll see what I mean.
So, when I say mysticism, I mean, I've talked about it before, and that's not the perfect requirement for you to, you don't have to go listen to 5,000 podcasts, but if you don't know what my definition of mysticism is, and there's no way that you can know what my definition is of a complex term when I use it in passing, and by in passing I mean in a very short presentation. So there's no way you can know what my definition of mysticism is.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the earth.
Then why make a 5-second video about it then, Stefan? Now, to be fair, he has many references and many citations when it comes to his definition of mysticism, which I indeed cover in the first reply to Stefan Molyneux mysticism video, which you can watch right now. It's linked in the description box.
Now, if you don't, this is the thing, if you don't know what someone's definition is, then by definition you're arguing a straw man. If you don't know what my definition of mysticism is, then whatever you're reacting to is a straw man. And the reason why you want to ask for people's definitions is to...
Well, to be fair, a 5-second video is kind of a self-straw man, Stefan, really, isn't it?
Avoid wasting everyone's time with an emotional overreaction to a straw man. Right? That's childish. That's immature. And you want your ideas to come across. You want to be taken seriously. You want people to respond to you in a positive way. I think. I hope. So it's really important to ask for people's definitions. And, you know, again, you can probably find instances where I haven't done that. Yes, I'm not perfect and all that. But, you know, this is what I try to remind myself of. So...
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the earth.
Well, Stefan, that's what this entire project is about. All these dozen or more videos I've made replying to you. Sorry, I've got a bit of a cough. The dozen or more videos I've made replying to you is what this entire project is about. That.
Somebody says, I've always thought Steph's arguments in this area are weak, such as the assumption of atheist as categorically correct, when I understand it to be of the same quality as climate change science. The mainstream encourages it, so that would be likely, right? I never wanted to take this up with him because I did not feel like it was an important part of the entire platform. Like, he mostly offers extremely positive, powerful information. I do not feel like Steph coming over to thinking astrology is legitimate would improve his platform necessarily, but I responded to this provocation. I do not have a platform for my own, so there is no opportunity to invite Steph to a formal debate on the subject. Any such thing, I would make sure I had all my ducks in a row first, rechecking and specifically sourcing many points. This may take a few weeks. So, and somebody says, why do people never want to get onto the live stream and ask a question? And so I replied, weak is, so he said, I always thought Steph's arguments in this area are weak.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the air.
Well, you didn't actually make an argument in that little 5-second locals clip. But if this chap you're talking about, this commenter, has made a misunderstanding, it's understandable for that reason. Now, yeah, you can always refer people to previous videos and radio shows you've done about mysticism, and there are quite a few of those if you use the search function on the freedomain.com website. You'll find quite a few of them, and indeed the two that I feature in I feature those two in the clip, in the last reply to Stefan Molyneux mysticism video. Funnily enough, in that particular video, I address and I play some of the audio in which Stefan defines mysticism very, very bluntly and very, very specifically and comprehensively. And he includes in the list of things that he would call mystical, listening to Pink Floyd.
Now, weak is a term of sophistry, a weak argument. See, weak attempts to implant powerlessness into the mind of the reader and thus associate a negative term with the argument. Right? This is a basic. It's like hate speech, right? You take a pejorative and you attach it to a person or an argument, and then you're attempting to correlate a disgust response or a contempt response to the debate or to the argument or to the arguer. It's just like attaching something that smells foul to someone so that they're unpopular. I mean, it's a wretched and rather base and pathetic trick. It's a weak argument.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the air.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, it's people say things like, I mean, I have discussions like this all the time with people in my comments section during the reply to comments video. People who use a lot of rhetoric and express a lot of subjective opinion, a subjective feeling about what I've said without actually explaining why I'm wrong. Happens all the time. Saying something's a steaming pile and absolute rubbish, not mentioning any names, it's not an argument. Yeah, things like that.
Well, weak is not an argument, ironically. And it's funny, and this is why I really encourage people to do philosophy rather than just listen to or read about philosophy. Do philosophy. And do philosophy with the smartest, most assertive person you can find.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the air.
Yeah, but Stefan, I am that person, so what do I do?
Because that way you find out if you're any good. It's all very well and good to think that you are an excellent ninja warrior because you've read a bunch of books on martial arts. But if you really think that you are a very good ninja warrior, you should go out and do some actual sparring. Because you don't know if you're any good unless you put it to the test. And so it's funny, people have listened...
It's just funny, I offered to do some sparring in Watford, and the person who I was supposed to spar with never showed up.
...to me, and he's listened to me for a long time, talks about a lot of my arguments, and yet he thinks that the word weak is an argument. Steph's arguments in this area are weak.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the air.
Well, I don't think his arguments... You see, it's just his arguments in this particular case weren't weak. They were non-existent, because it was a 5-second video on locals. If it had been longer, more explanatory, this individual may have felt differently, and may not even have used that piece of rhetoric weak at all. They might not have used that piece at all, which they used wrongly. They used it in a mistaken context. But they may have meant something differently and used the word weak instead. I would have just said absent, not weak.
The moment somebody says an argument is weak or debunked without providing proof, and all of this sort of nonsense. Steph's arguments are underdeveloped. Steph's arguments are immature. Steph's arguments are weak. Steph's arguments are whatever, right? I mean,
yeah, and was it comprehensively discredited? That's the one you always get. This theory has been comprehensively discredited. That's what the skeptics always say about conspiracy theories. It has been comprehensively discredited.
It just means you haven't learned anything. Like, it's literally possible to listen to me for thousands of hours and learn very little. It really is. Now, okay, and I remember when...
Well, he doesn't listen to you for thousands of hours. He listens to you for 5 seconds.
I used to play soccer as a teenager on Sunday afternoon.
That's football, mate. Football, all right? Football.
And it was just like, we didn't do any drills. We didn't do any... Right? We just played. And we played for, I don't know, hundreds of hours, right? And there was another team that got a coach, and they did drills, and they did practices, and they did all the stuff that's not as much fun as just kicking the ball around and running around. They did all the stuff that's not fun. And then we played them, and they completely beat us. Because we were hobbyists, and they were semi-pros. They did all the hard work. And so the fact that we were playing soccer a bunch without any strategy, without any drills, without any research, without any plan, any goal. And listen, nothing wrong with it.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the air.
Yeah, but supposing you just had 5 seconds practice, Stefan, supposing that's all you had. I mean, you could always get the mind powers that Charles had, didn't you, I slaughtered him, man. I slaughtered this pro at golf. I slaughtered him. Oh, I miss old Charles. But yeah, you this is the case you're talking about. You're talking about, we are still referring to this tiny little clip, this tiny little video you made.
Go play soccer, that's fine. I mean, I wouldn't have gone if it was a bunch of drills. I already had enough stricture in my life having 2 or 3 jobs as a teenager. I just wanted to go and be out in the sunshine and kick the ball around. Right. So if you've been in that kind of situation where you've been doing something from a no improvement, no practice hobbyist thing, and other people have been doing the difficult and hard work of genuinely improving, I mean, I would say that we barely improved over the course of playing soccer, which is, again, no problem. I don't regret it. I mean, it's fine. I mean, because the purpose was to go out, have fun, and kick the ball around, get some exercise, get some sunshine, do something physical. And so we achieved what we wanted to achieve, but what we wanted to achieve was not actually improving. If there's one thing that I would try to get across to you in these kinds of shows, the one thing is, be skeptical of yourself. Doesn't mean be hostile. You're skeptical of yourself because you have the capacity for improvement. It's a great act of self-love to be self-skeptical. Self-skeptical is saying I can do better. And I'm always saying this. I'm always saying this in my shows, to myself, in general. The reason I keep doing call-in shows is I'm like, I can do better than the last time. I can do better. I can do better in my arguments for free will. I can do better. I'm trying in this show to bring you something new, to do better than I've done before. It's really, really important to me. Now, of course, self-skepticism is often associated with like hostility to the self, or self-criticism in a negative, or self-abuse, or something like that. But self-abuse is when you say you can't do any better. Self-skepticism is like, I think you can do better. I think you can do better. Now, the particular path that I've chosen is to do better in a spontaneous, in-the-moment manner. To not write everything out ahead of time, usually. I remember reading about how Queen spent 3 weeks on the guitar dubs for Killer Queen. Like, fantastic for them.
Nice.
Fantastic for them. I prefer the live versions, but whatever, right? That's not my...
I didn't know that. He knows quite a lot about music trivia, this old Steph.
Particular level of obsessive attention to detail. I want to be fluid in the moment. I think that's the best way to communicate philosophy, because
I was fluid in the moment earlier. I'd had too much curry.
it shows that philosophy is not something you need to painstakingly rehearse for 2 weeks before you do it, but you could do it in the moment, because philosophy is there for the moment. It's there for in your life, when you're thinking, when you're facing a challenge, when that moment comes, as they generally come on a fairly regular basis, where your integrity and your virtue is tested and you need to be fluid and thinking in the moment. Philosophy needs to be available to you.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the earth.
I completely agree, and this is somewhere where I think this is probably Stefan's biggest gift, in that he has done that. He has provided that kind of that resource to me, I think. Because despite the fact that I keep making videos criticising him, I actually find him extremely interesting, and I said inspiring. And yeah, I wouldn't want to be without him. So for that, I'll always be appreciative. I don't think I would make these videos actually if I didn't really care about him that much. I think it's because I do like, I appreciate what he does so much that I make these videos criticising him.
In the moment. In the moment. So I am constantly trying to improve, constantly trying to do better. I mean, I took on just last night, the night before, Wednesday night live, I took on the task of, I am going to try to explain the 50s to the 80s. Right, 30 years in 20 minutes.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the earth.
I mean, goodness, no one can call him unambitious, can they? That's a very audacious. That's a very audacious thing to actually achieve. I mean, this is Richard D. Hall thinking he can solve the mystery of Rendlesham Forest with just a statement analysis. It's nothing compared to this. To explain the 50s to the 80s, 40 whole years, or 30 or 40 years in a 30-minute video. Well, I haven't seen that video yet, or listened to the radio show yet, but I look forward to it. I expect to have my mind blown, like in that Sidney Sheldon thing I showed you in the in what was it? I forgot what watch read party it was, but we looked at the little Sidney Sheldon thing, didn't we?
Now that's quite a big task to take on. And
No
I
kidding.
wanted to give it a try. But you can listen to this show and not become skeptical of yourself. Because when you're not skeptical of yourself, you waste everyone else's time, and then they don't want to talk to you about important things. Because they've got to battle back all the projection and straw man and nonsense, and that's a weak argument. They've got to do it. So life is short. I'm closer to the end than the beginning. My days are measured. The grains of sand in the hourglass are beginning to resolve themselves into individuals rather than this big bucket.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the earth.
Yeah, well, join the club, Stefan, honestly. I mean, obviously this is another tangent, but the quickening is Is it just my imagination, or is the quickening, that is the speed that notional time passes, is it actually accelerating still? Because it was predicted that it would slow down after 2012, after the Mayan calendar changed over. And if you want to know what I mean by quickening and notional time, time passes at a certain rate as it's measured by a clock. But if you're not looking at a clock, it always feels like it's passing a certain rate within your internal subjective clock. And if you want to know what I mean, if you ever said something like, "Oh, yeah, today's dragging, it really is," or "Doesn't time fly when you're having fun?" You're making a statement about notional time. Notional time has been accelerating since at least the 1960s. People of all ages have said this. So it's nothing to do with the age you are. It's something to do with someone suggested that after the 2012 Mayan calendar changeover, notional time would then begin to decelerate, but it hasn't. If anything, I think that acceleration is continuing, which is a shame, because essentially it reduces our notional lifespan, but there's nothing you can do about it except hope that a reverse quickening does kick in someday. And I know Stefan doesn't believe in these concepts, but I think he still understands the point I'm making.
So I don't want to waste time with people who are projecting. I don't want to
I do, but only in the cinema.
do philosophy and a journey of self-discovery at the same time. So it won't work. So this person is upset and angry at me for talking about mysticism in this way?
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the air.
Yeah, he overreacted, but this overreaction could have been avoided by you making a longer, more comprehensive video, Stefan. He's you're talking about mysticism in this way. You didn't talk about mysticism in any way. You just said mysticism is a gateway drug to mental illness. Just one sentence. Was it just a handful of words?
But they've invented their own term, they've invented their own arguments, and they say that they know how to debate, but they say something that is not a valid argument. So anyway, he did reply to this. Let me see here. Hey, Steph, I would say this post itself. The definition of mysticism is related to mental health in this manner. Do you have a more thorough argument for this? Do you have any data on this? Do you think this is a fair request? I do not have the exact post, but I believe one of your points is to understand another's argument. You must be able to argue on their behalf. Can you do this with mysticism? On the point of Darwinism and atheism, that would require me to do research that would take time. Perhaps after this research would be a good point to press on with a live stream question. Another point I recall is that species do not tend to jump from one species to another. If someone keeps breeding fish, even strange fish, they do not become a different species like a turtle. Do you have a more thorough argument for this? Do you have any data on this? And so, can you argue for mysticism? Now, see, to me, again, being able to steel man somebody else's argument is a good way of understanding whether you're projecting or not.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the air.
Are you all familiar with the concept of steel manning? It's the opposite of straw manning. It's a sort of a derivative kind of. It's a derivative concept that came out of the idea of the straw man. A straw man argument. I mean, you often hear people say this is a straw man argument. Is that you take when someone is making a point, you then take the weakest part of that point, even if it's a part of his thesis that he hasn't even mentioned. And then you just simply address that. A straw man is something easy to knock over. In other words, you just go, knock that straw man over like that. And a good example is you say, well, I believe that 9/11 was an inside job, for example. You say 9/11 was an inside job. Someone claims that. And then someone will say, oh, you believe... Well, they'll either say a straw man would be something like a moral straw man, which would be, you think the Jews were all phoned up and told to stay off work, something like that, which is that's a moral straw man. That's pushing you into the extremes of bigotry, in other words, to make out you're an immoral person for stating that. But on a logical sense, you could say, oh, I suppose you think the Earth is flat too. These flat earthers who think 9/11 was an inside job. That's an example of straw manning. I do go into details on this in my skeptic video, actually, my various skeptic videos. Steel manning is the opposite. It's where you address the strongest part of a person's thesis. It says here, it's a steel man argument, or steel manning is the opposite of a straw man argument. Steel manning is the practice of addressing the strongest form of another person's argument, even if it's not the one they presented. So that's steel manning. It is a good practice to do that. It's a good way of... It's a good way of knowing that you're in the right. I mean, the best way to do that is simply to look at what your opponent says in detail. Study them. Go to their conferences, go to their meetings, like I do with the skeptics.
But if the first thing he does is insult my argument and insult me, and it is, look, I mean, be fair, right? Saying that I have a weak argument is an insult, right? Now, saying I've made a mistake, that's not an insult, right? Saying, well, Steph has misinterpreted this, or he's got this data wrong, or here's a counter data, that's not an insult. But just saying an argument is weak, that's kind of insulting, right? So if you kind of follow up an insult by saying, well, I want you to steel man my position, it's like, why would I? If you think steel manning somebody else's position is really good, then you should do it first, right? Do you see what I'm saying? Is somebody arguing in good faith? Are they defensive? Are they triggered? Or are they in genuine pursuit of the truth and wish to enroll you in the journey towards accuracy? Because this is a manipulation. This is saying, well, I've insulted you, now I want you to argue my position. And again, people just, look, I want you guys to get involved in productive debates, and this is just not how to go about it. So that having been said, let me sort of address the content, because, it's a good and interesting question. So, to me, and I think this is a fairly good definition, it's not a dictionary definition, but again, I'm a philosopher, not a linguist. Okay, so, a definition of mysticism. Mysticism is taking a subjective experience and making it empirically true with neither coherence nor obligation.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the earth.
Now this is very interesting because Stefan has given his definitions of mysticism before, and in fact, as I said in the previous video I made called Mysticism, a Reply to Stefan Molyneux, I go into that in detail because I analyse 2 of the videos he made on that particular subject in that video. He's now going to go on to a very different definition, which I think is where he talks about subjective coherence and obligation. Because I think this indicates, I think, that he's changed his position since 2017 when he made that last radio show. Let's hear what he has to say.
Mysticism is when you take a subjective experience, make it objectively true, with neither coherence nor obligation. So let me sort of explain what I mean by that. So if you just have a feeling of oneness with the universe, and then you say, we are one with the universe, like it goes from a subjective experience of oceanic oneness, what Freud talked about, sort of the maternal feeling of union with the mother and so on. So you
No, not Freud, please. Freud, I've got a lot of problems with Freud. But anyway, go on.
take a subjective experience like a feeling of oneness with the universe, and you make it objectively true with neither coherence nor obligation. So what I mean by that is, it's just a feeling, it's translated into a fact, and it gives you no requirement for coherence or obligation.
I don't have a problem with that, actually. I think that makes sense to me.
So, for example, I watched Sound of Freedom, recommended movie, and in it, the man, I believe, this is from an interview that I've heard about rather than the movie itself, he feels, he has an experience that God says, here's what you have to do. Well, and in fact, the one guy, he's called Vampire or something like that, and he was sleeping with a prostitute. Turned out the prostitute was underage. He was going to kill himself, and God said, go save children. Go save children. So he had a subjective experience, or an experience that only occurred in his own mind, which is God says, and by that I mean like you wouldn't pick it up on a video recorder. God says, go save the children from sex trafficking. That to me is not mysticism, because it comes with coherence and obligation. The coherence is you don't both save children and damn them. So there's some coherence there. And there's an obligation, which is now he has to risk his life saving children.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the earth.
That's very interesting, what Stefan just said, because he has made a point that no skeptic would. For a skeptic, if you've seen the film Sound of Freedom, he's right, it's a very good film. The guy who has this, what he believes is a direct communication with God. A skeptic would say, well, it doesn't matter, because it's still unprovable, it's subjective. I mean, Steph said himself, it wasn't recorded on a video. How do we know it's just not his imagination? How do we know it's just not something he conjured up in his head? And everyone has to concede that these things sometimes are unprovable. Not always. I mean, there's a lot of psychical research, scientific research into this. But sometimes it simply is a very, very powerful, intuitive feeling. What was it like Jodie Foster said in the film Contact? I can't deny it because everything I know as a human being makes me believe that was true. I can't prove it, but it was just such a powerful feeling. I had this amazing experience, and everything about it makes me believe that it was true. And sometimes these things you can't prove them. It's like in one of the Chronicles of Narnia books. I think I referred to this before. One of the characters thinks, did I do the right thing? Did I do the wrong thing? And he says, I remember the tears in the lion's eyes. And he knew he'd done the right thing. And it's that, as the My Little Bumper girl said, I feel intuitively there's some sort of communication from the earth. Who's of course a figure of fun and is cruelly lampooned in this documentary. But it's still true. And I mean, amazingly, Stefan seems to understand that. I mean, Stefan has now completely departed from the skeptosphere with what he has just said. It's an extraordinary development on his part.
So that to me is not mysticism, because it's translating into a worldview or a philosophy of the world that has coherence and obligation. Coherence simply means it can't just contradict itself all over the place and so on, right? So mysticism is when you take a subjective experience, reframe it as true, and it has no requirement for coherence, and there's no obligation. And by obligation, I simply mean what in your behavior changes. What in your behavior changes as a result of your recasting of a subjective experience to objective fact.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the air.
Yeah, but you see, it's interesting he said that, and I wonder how far he's going to go with this, because this phrase, coherence and obligation, which he's just describing, coherence and obligation, is a classic feature of the near-death experience. Absolutely classic. The coherence is that they're extremely lucid. The obligation being that they do transform people's lives in ways that are very, very very coherent, very comprehensive, and that they make people who've had NDEs are often very single-minded about not only what happened to them, but about the meaning of their life after that. They don't sort of go off on some kind of fantasy cloud. They often become very, very self-possessed people indeed. So I wonder if Stefan is now going to accept that NDEs are real as a result of this, because they have coherence and obligation. Of course, they are completely unprovable. You can't take a photo of your NDE and bring it back for your album. But so many people have them, and there's so much about them which converges evidentially on a particular cause, and they have coherence and obligation. So maybe Stefan should consider that.
What changes? If it's not coherent, has no requirement for coherence, and it has no obligation to it, then it is a dangerous form of self-indulgence to believe that your inner states are true with no limitation of your projection of your inner states on the universe, no limitation for the requirement for coherence or obligation.
Would this be what some philosophers call this the subject without confines?
Then it's lazy. And I'm not talking about any listener here, I'm just talking about the mystics in general and how I talk about it. So, of course, I've talked about this before, but every now and then, when you're dating as a young man, you run into women who are mystics. And, they believe that the universe will provide them things because they want it. They believe that all they have to do is picture things and those things will happen. They usually have a smattering of vague psychic abilities and so on, right?
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the air.
Now, Stefan's going to go into more detail about this later, but what he's just described is a very testable hypothesis. Completely testable. So, I mean, he'll go into more details later about meeting women who think they're psychic, or maybe are. So, why not run with that? Run with this idea that this is a testable hypothesis. Give it coherence. Make the person proposing it or making this claim, make them have an obligation. You see, that would be my positive way forward in all this. So I'm hoping that Stefan would. Well, I know he doesn't date anymore because he's married, but maybe that's what. If you are dating and you'll meet one of these women and you are a skeptic, then why not do that?
They are some sort of communication from the air.
Now, if you genuinely believe, so how do you know it's self-indulgent and therefore dangerous and eroding your sense of reality? Is that if you let's say you genuinely believe that you're psychic, like you have the ability to read people's minds, to see into the future, to know the unknowable, and so on, right? Well, let's say that you woke up tomorrow with that ability. You could read people's minds, you could know the unknowable, and so on, right? You could see without being present. Well, I mean, the burden and possibilities of such a gift would be truly astonishing. It'd be truly, incredible, right? It would be incredible.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the air.
Yes, they would, Stefan. Yes, indeed. And I think the implication if Stefan is making here, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, is that for this reason, this is a reason to not to take as seriously this claim. Simply because, well, if it were true, it would be so revolutionary that it would be impossible to hide and things like this. But the truth of the matter is, the kind of revolution he's referring to has happened before. It's happened many, many times in history, actually, a few times. So, for example, with the discoveries that some, well, I'll come on to this. I'm going to come on to this in a minute, all right? But one of what he's talking about, I'll come on to the main point in a minute because this comes up again in more detail. But this is what would happen if UFOs were declassified, if there was disclosure, or if free energy was disclosed, and many, many other things that I talk about. It would be world changing, and so I don't really see. I mean, I'll come into more details in a minute of what I'm going on about here. But that's not a reason why it's not true, if that's where Stefan is going with this.
So what you would do, I don't know. I mean, you could do any number of things, almost anything, right? You could set up you could become a private investigator, and you could solve crimes, and you could make the world a safer and better place.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the air.
It's already happening. Some police forces already consult with psychics. There was a psychic detective in Alaska, I believe, who was actually targeted by the local mafia because she was so successful in working out their crimes. They decided to try and get rid of her because she was telling the police exactly what they were doing and where they were and things like this. So yeah, it's already happening, Stefan. Already happening.
You could go and find missing children, right?
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the air.
Yep, like Helen Duncan did when she was a little girl. She found a man lost in a blizzard. This is why she was tolerated by her community.
You could decide to go, and once you can prove psychic abilities, you would change the entire universe, because the entire world of physics would be upended, and therefore you would be spearheading an investigation into an entirely new kind of reality, hitherto unguessed, unseen, unknown, which would radically reshape people's relationships to what they perceive of as real.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the air.
Yeah, it's exciting, isn't it, Stefan? It's really, really thrilling, but that's exactly what is happening. That is exactly what is happening. It's happening exactly like it has before, because this sort of thing has happened many times before. It's what is known as a paradigm shift, and I know that phrase, that term is probably overused and misused, but that's what it generally means. And this sort of thing has happened before, for example, with the discovery of the New World. In the middle of the last millennium, Charles Darwin and the theory of evolution, the revelations by people like Albert Einstein and Sigmund Freud, and quantum theory, things like this. This sort of thing has happened before. It has happened before, and it will happen again. And when it does happen, it always happens in exactly the way it's happening now. It's just a handful of people really start the ball rolling, and they're usually laughed at and ignored and ridiculed by the rest of society, which is still stuck in its ways. As you yourself said, these Stone Age tribes, they persecute their thinkers into suicide, so they're still kept in the Stone Age. But you see, it takes a lot of guts for these people to actually come forward and say these things. They're accused of hoaxes. When the first duck-billed platypus was shown at a museum, a dead body was shown at a museum in London, people thought it was a fake. They said someone had killed an otter and put a duck's beak on it. This is how changes happen within the way we see reality. Someone discovers something, the others laugh at it. Eventually, what was it Arthur C. Clarke says, then it's accepted, then, I thought of it first. So, welcome to another moment in history when this is happening, Stefan. We are very lucky to be living at a time like this. We really, really are. Because centuries can go by and these upheavals don't occur, but we happen to be born and we happen to be living at a time when one of them is happening right now. So I hope you'll enjoy it as much as I do.
You'd be giving an enormous gift to the world. Who knows what else could be achieved? Who knows what else could be achieved with the new physics that you would be able to prove? The Amazing Randy has had for many decades now, I think, $1 million prize if you can prove psychic abilities.
Here we go.
You could take that $1 million and you could donate it to charity, or you could, there's so much that you could do.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the air.
Do you want to tell him or shall I? Okay, all right. Now I can refer you to any number of my skeptic talks, my skeptic events, my skeptic videos that I've made. Let me just find the book cover, which I actually had it here in my nose and I've deleted it. But there's all kinds of things I could always show you to various. I could always show you to the various videos I've made on this subject. The best one to go to is probably, I'm not going to put links in description boxes and things like that. The best one to go to, I'd say, is the one I did at in Swansea for Sufon. The skeptic one, that's my most recent. But anyway, let me just show you. There's a book actually called Randy's Prize. And you can get it. It's actually on Amazon there. It's this one here, this book here, Randy's Prize. Robert McLuhan, What Skeptics Say About the Paranormal, Why They Are Wrong and Why It Matters. That's all there. The late James Randi, was the one who had this $1 million challenge. From what I gather, actually, I hear that the $1 million challenge is no longer being offered by the JREF. I think since his royal Randiness passed away, I think they've decided not to, since he went to that great nothing in the skies, they believe. Well, he probably God knows what Randy said when he got to the spirit world. I wasn't expecting this. I thought it was. Maybe I'm still dreaming or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, the $1 million challenge is no longer being administered, I think. Yeah.
You could teach other people how to harness their gift, and that the world could become a wildly better place. So if you believe you have psychic abilities, your world and our world as a whole would change beyond recognition. It would be more powerful than space aliens coming down and announcing themselves on the lawn.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the air.
It would be probably on a par with that, or maybe even more, like you said. And Stefan, I find it interesting that you understand the comparison, because what you just said is similar to something I would say about space aliens.
So that is coherence and consequences. If you believe you have psychic abilities, and here's the thing, you would only need to have a slight, you wouldn't need to be 100%, obviously, right? It would be psychic abilities there. My powers don't work that way or whatever, but you'd only need to be slightly better than random in order to prove your psychic abilities, right? So, the amount of good that you could do in the world. You could reveal false flags and stop wars, right? You could, trace Bitcoin to ransomware.
Well, people try and do that and they get laughed at.
Scumbags, right? You could do so much with your psychic abilities. So if you genuinely believed you had psychic abilities, your world would change enormously, and you would either radically revolutionize the entire planet and everyone's consciousness and our sense of physics and reality. You would either do that, or you would find out that you don't have psychic abilities, and you'd have to let go of that that rather grandiose piece of vanity.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the air.
That's fair enough. I mean, if it was really proved, the null hypothesis essentially was proven true, which it hasn't. You'd have to just accept that, I suppose. But the thing is, this is what the skeptics claim. They claim that the null hypothesis is the only one that works, and there's many reasons why to think they're wrong. And I've talked a lot about this. There's a lot of literature on this, and from many sources. And I'm going to bring one up in a minute, actually. But how much? What you see, Stefan doesn't seem to be aware that he says, well, the world would change if someone had this gift, but it does change, and things do change, but the change is very, very hard work. The people who support this move forward, they have to go up against the inertia, the mental and cultural inertia of the rest of society, which, strangely enough, Stefan, in many, many other contexts, you seem to understand. You've made many comments and along the lines of the understanding the power of conformity and convention and laziness, and the fact that our species does have this kind of stick in the mud nature to ourselves. You understand that, but you seem to have cast it aside now, and you think, oh, don't worry. If anyone came up with psychic powers, it would be the equivalent of like superconductivity. You just fly, you levitate through the air, and to the point where everyone will know about it, and you'd be solving crimes and becoming a private investigator, etc., etc., reality change and stuff like that. That's not how it works. It's not how it works at all.
Right, so you would do the tests and all of that. And you would then have to let go. And you'd have to return to reality. Of course, nobody has psychic abilities. I mean, we know this from an evolutionary
Yes, they do.
standpoint. If it was possible to read minds, the evolutionary advantage in terms of hunting and combat and so on would be so enormous that the mind readers would have taken over humanity hundreds of thousands of years ago. Like the moment anybody developed the ability to communicate without any medium known to us now, like without having to call out or do hand signals or smoke signals, the moment that anybody communicated, you'd win all the battles. So we know there's no such thing as psychic abilities. It's all lies and nonsense and vanity.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the air.
Now, this is a common argument you get from skeptics. If this sense actually existed, how come nature hasn't evolved to use it? Because often people say that dogs and cats, for example, appear to have greater psychic powers than humans. They can see ghosts and things like that when humans can't. So how come they don't use them to catch mice? How come they don't use them to avoid predators? Maybe they do. You see, maybe they do, and it also could be that the sense actually isn't powerful enough for that purpose. So, for example, there's several different ideas. It could be similar to the magnetic sense, the way that birds sense magnetic fields. It works up to a point, but it doesn't have the practical attributes and factors to evolve in the way that Stefan says it is, which as a result it has not evolved. On the other hand, there is a good point. He's making a good point. Now, I do urge you, Stefan, if you haven't read The Science Delusion by Rupert Sheldrake. Unfortunately, the American publisher didn't have the courage to go along with the actual title that Sheldrake wanted, and it's called Science Set Free in the United States. I don't know about Canada. But Rupert Sheldrake talked to a guy in the army he knew who went to sniper school, and he was told by his instructor that because a sniper, of course, is someone who shoots you without you knowing you're there from a great distance. So the target actually doesn't know you're there, and the idea is you shoot them before they know, from a long way away, before you knew them what they are, with a very high power rifle. And the instructor told this student sniper, don't look directly at your target until you're literally ready to pull the trigger. Always just keep him in your peripheral vision. Don't look directly at him. Why? Because he'll sense you're there. And Rupert Sheldrake actually has this article called "The Sense of Being Stared At." It's a chapter in the book. So do read that, Stefan. It'll answer a lot of what you've just said.
However, if you genuinely believe you do have psychic abilities, and you don't work as hard as you can to work them for the benefit of humanity, then you're just a complete a-hole as a whole, right? Because you would have this incredible gift, and you would do nothing to help the world with it. You would only shuffle it out to try and gaslight potential dates into how special you are.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the air.
That's a good point, actually. Most psychic people don't behave like that. They do use their gifts to try and do good.
I mean, with great ability comes great responsibility. I have a great ability for philosophy, and therefore I have sometimes very heavy responsibility to use it for the betterment of the world as best I can. I can't even tell you what my life would be like if I had not taken every opportunity I could to share philosophy with the world. I mean, my life would be horrible. To know that you have this kind of ability, and yet to use it for I'm special parlor tricks would be horrendous beyond words. So to me, somebody...
Yeah, well, I should add at this point that I understand exactly what he means. If I wasn't doing Hapanmo TV and the other Hapanmo things, I would feel awful. It would be shameful, I think.
Who has a non-empirical, non-rational source of knowledge, such as the Ten Commandments, that's not mystical. Because there's coherence, right? The commandments don't contradict each other rampantly, and there are consequences. You have to follow the Ten Commandments. So I prefer empirical sources of truth, but I prefer of actionable truth, of consequential truth. Truth which has no consequences, it may be true, but it's unimportant.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the air.
That's interesting, actually, because there are still profound consequences, though, for what Stefan was saying. And again, it's interesting that he's once again come back to this point, the one in which he really has driven a wedge between himself and the skeptic movement enormously, because they would say it doesn't matter, it's not true, that's all that matters. No empirical evidence. Forget coherence and obligation. If there's no empirical evidence, then it has to be rejected.
So, in order of hierarchy, as a philosopher, I prefer, and for good reasons, rational and empirical sources of knowledge. Knowledge that has coherence and consequences.
Same here.
Now, second best is non-empirical, non-rational sources of knowledge that have coherence and consequences.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the air.
Which again brings us back to things like near-death experiences, which most skeptics reject. Stefan essentially is categorizing, he's interesting, he's categorizing something that really just qualify as sort of the B list of what he just talked about. Something which may not be empirically true and indeed can never be proven true, but has coherence and it has obligations. Very, very, very intentionally, actually, with NDEs. I wonder what he thinks about NDEs.
By coherence, I mean they don't rampantly contradict each other, and there's some good morals in there, some UPB compliant ethics like thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not murder, and so on, because those have coherence and they have consequences. The third worst, right? Best, reason and evidence. Second, coherence and consequences. Third is the people who have mystical beliefs. They have beliefs that are non-empirical, non-rational, and they have no coherence and no consequences. That's the gateway to mental health.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the air.
I didn't say mental illness, sorry.
Then why not make your locals clip 30 seconds longer and just explain it? It doesn't take much to explain that, Stefan. And you would have avoided all this misunderstanding you had with one of your viewers.
I didn't say that's the gateway to evil. The gateway to evil is people who have rules that are contradictory and are actionable. Right, so a thief is evil because he has a belief system that he should not respect other people's property rights, but other people have to respect his property rights. Because you don't steal something if it's just going to get stolen from you. So that's contradictory, and it's consequential in that he acts upon it. So I said it was a gateway to mental illness, not to evil. Because the reason it's a gateway to mental illness is one way that you could really harm someone would be to remove from their consciousness all signs of a negative path. Right, so if you wanted to make somebody ill, you would feed them food that was clogging their arteries and just wrecking their health. But they didn't gain any weight. It didn't show up on any scans. It didn't show up on any blood work. Because then you just, the widowmaker, right? The aorta would just tear or get clogged and they would just die, right? So if you were to put someone into a state of ill health, the best way you would do that would be to remove all of the markers or the signs that their health was being compromised. Because then they would be lean, they would maybe even have muscles, they would have great blood work, they would have all the indicators of good health, but there was a secret thing ravaging their body, and so on. So they wouldn't take any preventive action, they wouldn't change their behavior, because all of the signs of ill health would be removed, right? That would be a very effective way to harm someone and really kill them. In the same way, if you wanted to have a doctor who harmed his patients, you would tell that person he was a great doctor, you would pass him with flying colors, you would give him all the awards known to man, while he was in fact a terrible, incompetent, and dangerous doctor. You would just give him all the accolades and make sure patients went to him and make him immune from being sued, and then he would do a lot of damage to people, right?
Well, you could just have a modern NHS bureaucracy that couldn't cope with the Lucy Letby thing, but that's a tangent.
So, a mystic is someone who claims to have knowledge that requires no coherence and has no consequences. There's no obligation, which means they're special, they're wonderful, they're important, they are of value, with no requirement for coherence or obligation, no obligation on their part.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the air.
Well, there's no disagreement there, Stefan, none. But I think that is a straw man. You're straw manning a bit. That's the third worst thing you were talking about, which I don't think counts for most people you would call believers in this sort of thing.
I mean, can you imagine if you were dating a woman and she said, "I can cure cancer by touching someone." Oh my gosh, my uncle has cancer. I want you to touch him so that his cancer is cured. And she says, no. No. And of course, every single person I've ever heard who's claimed to have psychic abilities, I mean, it's very easy. You just need a deck of cards, whatever, right? Oh, you have psychic abilities. Okay, I'm looking at a card, what card it is. And you don't have to get it perfect, but you have to get better than random. Right? It's like a 10-minute test.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the air.
Okay, there are two real points here. The cancer girl, right? Yeah, people who claim those abilities wouldn't just say no. They would do it. But the thing is, though, what would happen to people like that? What would Big Pharma do to people like that? What do they do to people like that? And as for the cards, things like that, the psychical research deals with this when it comes to like Xenocard and things like this. And it's interesting to read up about that. The Xenocard thing actually does have an effect, but then that effect drops off after a while. This is probably because the whole thing is so damn boring. What show? Oh, that's got a circle on it. That's got a square on it. A couple of wavy lines. A triangle. It's like chewing cardboard, really, isn't it?
To see if somebody has psychic abilities. Right, but if a woman genuinely believes she touches a man, cures the cancer, your uncle has cancer, but she won't go and touch him, I mean, you understand how horrible that would be. How horrible that would be.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the air.
Yes, but you see, has that ever happened? Has that actually ever happened? Someone who professes his ability says, "Oh well, I'm not curing them." It just doesn't happen. Like in the Green Mile, when they take John Coffey out of prison, they sneak him out of the jail to go to cure the governor's wife. He doesn't sort of say, "No, I'm not going to do it." I mean, they take it for granted that he would agree to do it, and he understands this. Coffey. He's a sort of hyper-empathic person anyway, but there's no question after they sneak him out of jail and take him all that way that he wouldn't do that very thing. It's great. If you've not seen The Green Mile, brilliant film. Tom Hanks is in it about a prison and there's a death row block in the prison, and one of the inmates who's in there for murder and is going to be executed. He's got like psychic abilities, and he can heal. He's a healer. He's a psychic healer. Brilliant film if you've not seen it.
And of course, if there were people out there who believed that someone could touch cancer and get rid of it, then would they take treatments? Would they, right? No, they wouldn't. Just get someone to touch. Right, so she's doing a lot of damage. Holding out the hope that touching people can cure cancer will get some
Depends if it's real or not.
people to not get their cancer dealt with or treated, because they'll just go looking for people who can cure with a touch.
But what if it's true, Stefan?
And also, what kind of person, if they say, I can cure cancer with a touch, and you say, my beloved uncle has cancer, please come and help him, and she says no, what kind of monster would she be?
Now, she would be a monster, but does that actually happen, Stefan? Is it real? Is that true, or is that just a hypothetical you invented?
So she's getting a feeling of specialness and value. It could be he, but, and certainly it is he sometimes. Warlocks, I guess, right? So she's getting a whole sense of importance and specialness and vanity with no coherence, and the coherence is what keeps us sane. The need to make things fit together, the need to smooth out the jagged edges of inconsistencies, the need to assemble ideas into a coherent framework that hang together, that's part of what keeps us sane. Why? Because the universe is a coherent framework that hangs together. It is consistent. It is empirical. It is logical. And mental health is our relationship to reality. If our mental health, or if our perceptions are defined relative to vainglorious whims that make us feel special, with no requirement for coherence and no requirement for obligation. If you claim that something is true, but have no requirement for coherence, and you never have to act upon it, you will drive yourself crazy. Like whipping a horse off a cliff. You will drive yourself mad.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the air.
All right, I think I'm getting the picture now that Stefan and I don't really disagree that much, if at all. And our actual, what appears to be our disagreement in this situation, is a misunderstanding of definitions, referring to the original 5-second intro clip. That's how it seems to be to me, because he himself said that the Ten Commandments are not mysticism. Things that appear to be paranormal or supernatural but have coherence and a sense of obligation are not mysticism. Which again, this is what splits him completely with the skeptic movement, because the skeptics would say, yes, they are mysticism. They are mysticism because they're not empirical. And he would say, no, they may not be empirical, but they still have coherence and obligation, therefore they're not mysticism. So I think we're arguing over semantics right now, Stefan. That's what I reckon is happening right now.
I mean, if you look, I don't put Christianity in this context, because the need for Christianity to be consistent, that's the entire basis of scholasticism and theology, and like huge amounts of debates about whether Adam and Eve had a belly button and so on, right? So this need to make it coherent and cohesive. You know, I have a good friend on FDR who sends me videos and articles and arguments about the cohesive nature of Christianity, and this has been going on for over 2,000 years to make it cohesive, and of course to act upon it. To act upon it. And you see, the woke stuff is a form of mysticism in this way, in that the woke stuff does not have to be coherent.
It does
It
not.
does not have to be coherent. I mean, you can be racist against everyone except whites. That's a completely self-contradictory statement, right? But that doesn't matter. In terms of actionability, most people, it's called virtue signaling, right? It's called virtue signaling. It's the old thing about, I think we should take care of the homeless. Oh, do you have a spare room? Maybe we can put one up. Oh, no, that's different, right? Because then you have to actually, you don't just say it, you have to act on it.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the air.
Well, the issue with homelessness is a bit more complicated, and again, we're going off on a tangent, but I made a video called My Argument with a Homeless Person, so it's a bit more complicated than that. But for the rest of what he said, I think I maybe see kind of what he's getting at. I'll just listen to that bit again. Sorry, but I just need to go back and listen to that bit again.
Adam and Eve had a belly button, and so on. Right, so...
All right, yeah, I see what you mean.
I mean, you can be racist against everyone except whites.
Yeah, I'm
It's a
getting what he's saying. I
self-contradictory
just need to
statement.
try and remind him what, because he raised
But
not
that
like
doesn't
two
happen.
separate points there.
In terms of actionability,
You know,
most people, it's called virtue signaling, right? It's called virtue signaling.
yeah.
It's the old thing about, I think we should take care of the
See-
homeless. Oh, do you have a spare room? Maybe we can put one up. Oh, no, that's different, right? Because then you have to actually, you don't just say it, you have to act on it.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the air.
Now, some people have suggested that wokeism is a kind of religion, and it does seem to be. Maybe it is. I mean, I go into more details on this in some of my other videos where I discuss political correctness and things like that. But it does seem to have like some of the attributes of religion. So it's similar. It's strangely equivalent, even though of course it's not in form of religion. Nearly all wokeists are atheists. But it has like that kind of. I mean, Sargon of Akkad has made several videos drawing really intriguing parallels between wokeism and cult, a religious cult. So, yeah, I mean, it's a big subject. Again, it's a slight tangent, but wokery is a kind of, it is a strange kind of cultic mysticism. Yeah, using Stefan's definition. Yeah, it is.
And, of course, this, if you want data, I can give you data. The leftism is the most detached from reality. It's the most virtue signaling. It's the least coherent, least actionable, or least beliefs that people want to act upon. We should help the poor. Well, okay, you should give away your possessions to help the poor, right? Like Ben and Jerry's were saying, oh, let's remember on this July 4th that America's built on stolen land, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, you all own a bunch of stores. You should give up that land to natives. You should give up those stores.
It's interesting. It's an interesting one of my most interesting bits in the Bible is when the rich guy wants to become one of Jesus' disciples, and he says, "Well, take everything you have and give it to the poor." And he says, "I can't do that." He says, "That's I think when he says it's easier for a rich man to pass, or a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than from a wealthy man to enter the kingdom of heaven," or something like that.
They just hand them over. You believe it's stolen, and, right? But it's not about that. It's not actionable. People don't want to act on it in that kind of way. It's a form of mysticism, which is a form of saying, I'm good with neither coherence nor consequences, with neither a rational construct nor any obligation. Right? If a man says, women are hard done by in the workplace, okay, well, give up your job for the woman. That would be actionable. You see, it's action that
There's some guys who are actually doing it through their own white male guilt. They really are.
limits madness. It's actions that limit madness. Because when you have beliefs without consequences that you don't have to act on personally, those beliefs will detach you from reality. Which is why we don't buy diet books from fat guys, right? So mysticism is the projection of an internal state onto the universe as if it's true, with neither coherence nor consequences, with neither a rational framework nor obligation to act. Which is why I always put the empirical test. I knew it was always going to be this way, right? Which is why I always put the empirical test on the women I met who claimed to be psychic. I'm psychic. Oh, let me get a deck of cards. I'd love to see this. It doesn't work that way.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the air.
It doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't. Do they really say that? Oh, it just doesn't work that way. Well, you may want to ask yourself why so many of these people, not just women but men too, apply for psychical research laboratories. Because you can't walk into the SPR or somewhere like that, subject yourself to a double-blind empirical test and say, "Oh, but it doesn't work that way." No, you essentially are in contract with the people doing the test. That if the results don't come through, you just accept they haven't come through. And I don't know if Steph's aware of this. It's strange because he did read Susan Blackmore. I mean, I did another video about I think it was the last one I did about the afterlife. I think he read like Susan Blackmore's article on the afterlife, and I remember I had to deal with that. I remember I addressed it in the video.
Right, this is always the thing, right? It doesn't work that way. No, it just doesn't work, right? So it's a belief that you're special with a certain knowledge that you're not. That's a huge contradiction, and contradictions lead to madness. And the way that you limit contradictions is you work for coherence, which means you attempt to iron out contradictions. If you say gases expand and contract when heated, that's a contradiction. You got to figure it out, work it out, so it doesn't, because that madness is contradictions, right? Believing opposing things simultaneously. So a woman who says she's a psychic, and then you say, let me get a deck of cards, fantastic, we can go get that $1 million from the amazing Randy in Las Vegas, and then we can do wonderful things, travel the world, give to charity, or whatever, right? So she says, I'm psychic, so she says, it's true that I'm psychic, and of course I wouldn't believe things just for the sake of vanity and feeling and looking special, but I know for certain. And then you say, well, fantastic, let me see, right? If someone says something is true, asking for validation is a mark of respect.
Yeah, that's fair enough, I suppose. Yeah, I mean, but I mean, again, that often they will. There are ways and means of doing this. Just holding up a card in a pub when you're on a first date is not a proper test anyway.
And then, of course, you always hear, well, it doesn't work that way. I can't control it. It's random. Blah blah blah. Okay. Well, if it's random and you can't control it, how do you know that it's true? Because there is a certain amount of coincidences that simply accumulate in everyone's life, right? In everyone's life, there is an accumulation of coincidences. There's some dreams that come true, and we always forget the dreams that don't come true. You think of someone, and then they call, and we never think about all the millions of times we think of people, but they don't call. You get all of this, right?
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the air.
Yeah, that's the law of large numbers. I've talked before about Edwin Mantell, the man who paints the future. I mean, this is what the skeptics just say about him. Well, how many he only has he has about 20 of these paintings, which he's gathered over a number of years. However, he's been to sleep at least 365 times a year. So, what does he dream about when he doesn't make these paintings? See, that's the sort of I suppose that's a valid argument. You've got to ask yourself, well, has this been taken into account? But I think Stefan is now strawmanning the scene a bit, because that's not what psychical research is like. Psychical research is far more sophisticated than that, and indeed he's going to say something else in a minute, which again is a bit of a typical skepper thing to say, which I'm not sure he's really thought out.
We think something bad has happened to someone, and that once or twice in our life, when it turns out something bad has happened to someone, we grab onto that and we say, I had a premonition that something bad was happening to that person, and it turned out it's true, it was a bad thing, and we forget about, again, the millions of times we've had premonitions that things are going to happen positively or negatively, and none of it comes true.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the air.
All right, Stefan. All right. So, what if it comes true 10 times, though? You said if you latch onto this one occasion where you dreamed of something and it came true. It's like the guy, what's his name, Drosnin, the guy who wrote the Bible Code. He predicted the assassination of the Israeli Prime Minister, Yitzhak Rabin. And the skeptics say, well, that's just a coincidence. But, I mean, there's lots of other things he didn't predict and things like that. Okay, but what if it comes through 10... What if you have dreams that something and they come true 10 times? What if it happens 100 times, Stefan? What if it happens 1,000 times? Now, you can say like once is coincidence, twice, 3 times coincidence. What if it's 10 times? Is 10 times coincidence? Is 100 times? Is 1,000 times? Are you just going to say, well, that's just coincidence? Because if you do, you end up in a fallacy which I've identified in my skeptic talk, which is you can just say that about anything. There's nothing physically possible in this world which is so unlikely that someone can just say, well, that could never happen. It's too unlikely to happen. If it's physically possible, it can happen. It is physically possible that Michelangelo can kick some paint pots around a room and create the Sistine Chapel mural. That's one of the examples I gave. It's possible that you can get a random noise generator just hissing static at you, and suddenly a beautiful tune comes out of it. It's purely by chance. And it's possible that you can buy 5 lottery tickets 5 weeks in a row and win 5 weeks in a row. It's just a coincidence. And if I say that it's just a coincidence in all those examples I've just given, no one can prove me wrong. No one. Because you least of all, Stefan, because like many skeptics, I wonder if there is a statistical ceiling above which you will stop crying coincidence. And you have to define where that cut-off point is. And once you've defined it, you have to define why you've set it at that level, and things that cross over above, anything that rises above that ceiling, you can no longer just throw, oh, it's a coincidence at it. And until you do that, then it's a coincidence thing. It's just a get out of jail free card. It's an unfalsifiable hypothesis, which, as you know, is a fallacy. So I want you to just bear that in mind. Bear that in mind, mate. There we go.
Forget about all that. So you understand. There's no strictness, right? And so if you feel you have the truth, but you studiously avoid any test of that truth, then you know that you don't have the truth, right?
Yeah, but
so this is the
if you avoid that truth, but what if you don't? What if you don't avoid testing it?
Prediction, right? Is that you say, I'm psychic, somebody asks for proof, and you steadfastly avoid proving anything, right? Because you know. You know you're not psychic. I mean, you know that. That's why people don't go and pick up the Amazing Randy's $1 million. It's kind of what that money is for, right?
No, it's not. And I cover that in detail in my skeptic talk, but it's far more complicated than that. You know about George Simpson, the guy who sued them? It's several times this has happened, Stefan. Look into the history of the $1 Million Challenge. Look at what goes on behind the scenes with it.
Plus, there's no physics that would explain it or anything like that. So yeah. The wages of sin is death. And the wages of vanity is mental illness. Right? So if I just said to myself, I'm just the greatest, I'm the best, I'm Muhammad Ali of philosophy, whatever, I'm just super at it and just fantastic at it.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the earth.
You do say that, Stefan. You say it all the time. But you know what? Maybe you're right. There's nothing wrong with blowing your own trumpet if you've got something to blow.
But I never wrote or debated or did anything with it. And then people said, and I said to people, I'm the best philosopher, and they'd say, well, tell me something wise. I'd say, no, it doesn't work that way. I'm the best mathematician in the world. Oh, can you solve this math problem? No, it doesn't work that way.
I feel intuitively that they are some sort of communication from the earth.
Right, well, that's an unfair comparison, Stefan. It is a very unfair comparison. But, it is, you do have to be willing to test yourself. This is why he's right about the need to test yourself. He's right about you've got to be critical of yourself. This is why I get into long debates with Steve Mumbling and David Smith and all the other skeptics. This is why I welcome their input. This is why I've challenged Steve Mumbling to a debate, which he hasn't got back to me on yet.
No, it kind of does. That's how you know. That's how you know whether you're the best mathematician in the world.
Fair enough.
If somebody thinks they're healthy when they are in fact very sick, that's not good for them, and it's not good for them to participate in that lie. It's not healthy. It will kill them or make them more sick, to put it as mildly as possible. So, if what you believe is a delusion that is never tested by the need for logical coherence or empirical action, then you are guarding the delusion, knowing it's a delusion, but believing in it anyway. That's a contradiction that severely harms your mental health. And
yeah, okay, that's all the audio I'm going to play for that particular program. Stefan actually goes on for another 15 minutes or so, but he goes on to a completely different subject. Now, I should point out that the subject he goes on to is very interesting indeed. He goes on to address something I think very important, because the idea that only being very mystical can you find union with God. In other words, being in his view illogical can you find union with God, when he makes the point about the fact that the universe is a very logical thing. It's very coherent, to use his terminology, and that God has created life in the form of man with a brain capable of rational thought. Therefore, it should not be. It doesn't make sense that it is actually irrational. You have to be irrational and mystical in order to find union with the divine. Quite the opposite. And that's a good point. That's a very interesting point. But I'm not going to address that at all in detail in this particular video, because that in itself I think requires an entire new video, because it's a completely different topic and a very, very interesting one that I think deserves quite a long dedicated production to address. But anyway, that was an interesting video from Stefan, which I think I see another side of him. And I also sense this shift which I've mentioned in him before, this idea that he's coming more over to our way of thinking. Not that he's going to do a Dave Cullen and become a Christian believer, but he has abandoned the old atheo-skeptico, atheism plus side that the old atheist-skeptic movement used to have. And some of his opinions here put him at complete odds with the skeptic movement. So very interesting indeed. I mean, I look forward to see. I'm going to say this was only a couple of weeks old, this video, this production. So I'm very keen to see where he goes from here. I want to know more. I want to know what he's going to do next, what he's going to say next. That I think would be very, very important indeed. But anyway, great stuff, Stefan. Thank you very much for that. I do appreciate you, despite being critical of you sometimes. What about me? What am I going to say next? Well, I have challenged Steve Mumbling to a debate. Like I said, I put comments on his channel and on mine, which he hasn't replied to yet, saying, Steve, I've changed my, I did say in the comments reply video that I was, I'm not going to debate you, Steve, because we did this debate, didn't we, on, we've already done a debate, it was on the Apollo detectors, and I'm not going to debate you live again. But having thought it over, and I've been discussing this by email with somebody, I think maybe a debate with Steve Mumbling might be a good idea, with one condition. It's got to be about other subjects on the moon landings. Everything else is on the table, but the moon landings I want left off. I'd like to discuss UFOs with Steve Mumbling and with several other people, several other subjects as well. UFOs in particular, I'd like to discuss with Steve. I really, really would. Then I'm happy to debate him face to face. Just like we did with Apollo Detectives, just me and him. I think that would be I think that would be good actually. But again, no moon landings, everything else permitted. So Steve, I have thrown down my gauntlet. I'm waiting for you to accept my challenge. Come on, tough guy, show us what you're made of. We know you can do it. Come on. What's coming next? Well, I don't know if I do this debate with Steve Mumbling. I don't know if and when it's going to happen. One thing I do know for certain is going to happen is on Tuesday. Something very important is happening in Mexico. There is going to be a government hearing on UFOs, very similar to the one that happened in the United States Congress a couple of weeks ago. And I'm going to be, I don't know if I'll be able to watch it live. It happens quite late at night, our time. But I will see what I can do about watching a video of it, and indeed I will be doing a reportage on it. So that will probably be my next video. All right, but unless something else comes up in the meantime. But once again, everyone, thanks for watching Hapanwo TV. Hospital Porters, Pride and Dignity, Stop the New World Order.